I never imagined that love could feel like a battlefield. I had believed marriage was a partnership, a space built on trust, honesty, and care. But with her it became a game, a labyrinth of subtle maneuvers and hidden strategies. Every word she spoke, every smile, every compliment seemed innocent, almost affectionate, but beneath it lay manipulation, calculated, precise, and designed to unsettle me. It began small. A teasing comment here, a joke that stung there. At first I laughed, dismissing the discomfort as oversensitivity. But slowly patterns emerged, tiny, almost imperceptible nudges that challenged my confidence, seeded doubt, and tested my patience. She wasn't openly cruel. She was clever, charming, and dangerously deliberate. I realized with growing unease that I was no longer navigating a partnership. I was facing a strategist who thrived on control. The turning point came one evening during a simple dinner at home. I suggested something harmless, an idea meant to bring warmth and connection. She laughed, brushed it aside, and subtly enlisted our child to reinforce her version, making me appear foolish and incapable in the eyes of the people I loved most. A familiar burn of frustration and disbelief spread through me. The woman I had trusted completely had weaponized my family, my home, my life. And then it crystallized. I couldn't fight her with anger. Confrontation would only feed her dominance. No, I had to respond differently, quietly, strategically, deliberately. I would turn her manipulation back on her, not with cruelty, but with precision. Every observation, every interaction, every choice would be a calculated step. By the time she recognized it, the game would already have shifted. By then, I would have reclaimed my dignity, my authority, and the balance she had tried to steal. I would win not with noise or fury, but with patience, presence, and the quiet inevitability of a plan executed perfectly. When I first met Laura, I was utterly captivated by her energy. She wasn't just beautiful. She was brilliant, witty, and intoxicatingly confident, the kind of woman who seemed to command every room she entered without effort. Her laughter was infectious, her gaze direct and fearless, and there was a magnetic pull in the way she carried herself. At first, I admired her independence, the way she spoke her mind unapologetically, the way she challenged conventions and people alike. I thought I had finally found someone who would push me, excite me, and make life vibrant in ways I had only dreamed of. I felt alive around her, as though the world itself had brightened, and I believed with all the reckless certainty of love that this was the person I was meant to be with. We started dating casually, but our connection deepened quickly, almost dangerously. Dinner dates turned into long nights of laughter and conversation, exploring dreams, fears, and ambitions, sharing stories that felt too intimate to reveal to anyone else. She listened in a way that made me feel understood, truly seen, as if she could peer into the corners of my mind I didn't even admit to myself. Friends warned me, cautioned that she could be overwhelming, intense, unpredictable. But I felt like I had finally met someone who matched my own energy, someone whose spark could ignite mine. I fell for her completely, without hesitation, convinced that love was supposed to feel like this: consuming, intoxicating, and slightly dangerous in the best way possible. After a year we married. Life seemed perfect. Our home felt warm and balanced, our routines harmonized, and we shared visions for careers, travel, and eventually family. In the beginning, everything seemed aligned. I celebrated her victories, encouraged her ambitions, and supported her passions. She reciprocated in kind, praising my work, boosting my confidence, and making me feel indispensable in ways I had rarely experienced before. It was intoxicating, a perfect rhythm, a partnership I thought would last a lifetime. Then, imperceptibly, cracks began to appear. It started with small, almost invisible things. Subtle criticisms disguised as jokes, playful challenges that carried a hidden edge, remarks designed to make me second-guess myself. "Are you sure you can handle this?" she asked once, her voice light, her eyes sharp and calculating. Or she would redirect conversations, framing her suggestions as wiser, better, almost unavoidable alternatives. At first I laughed it off, thinking she was teasing, testing me harmlessly, but a cold doubt began to take root. Soon, the manipulation became more sophisticated, more deliberate. She began orchestrating situations to observe my reactions, carefully pushing emotional buttons I didn't even know existed. Conversations with friends became minefields of subtle critiques. Decisions about finances, parenting, and daily life were quietly challenged in ways that chipped away at my confidence. She was never overtly cruel, never dramatic, but the emotional weight she exerted was relentless. Every interaction became a puzzle, every disagreement a test I hadn't realized I was taking. The most insidious part was how she involved others. Even our closest friends seemed to absorb her perspective, sometimes unconsciously, leaving me feeling isolated, doubting my own judgment, and questioning the very reality I had once taken for granted. There was no open hostility, only a slow, precise erosion of certainty, a masterful game of perception and control that left me anxious, second-guessing, and perpetually tense. By the time I saw the full pattern, it was undeniable. Laura had been playing a game from the very beginning, weaving a web of subtle influence to control perception, emotion, and outcome. And with that clarity came a cold, sharp understanding. I could not confront her directly, could not challenge her openly, for that would only feed her sense of power. To reclaim my dignity, my home, and my sanity, I would need to step into her game, but on my terms, strategically, patiently, and with unyielding precision. It hit me like a thunderclap. The woman I had loved, trusted, and admired was no longer simply my partner. She was a player, and I had to become the strategist. Every move, every word, every decision from that moment forward had to be deliberate. I would not be her pawn. I would not be manipulated. I would observe, plan, and execute a course that restored the balance she had quietly dismantled. And in that realization, beneath the anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, a strange thrill surged, because now I was no longer vulnerable. Now the game had changed. The first time I truly grasped the depth of Laura's games, it wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no explosive fights, nothing that anyone else would notice. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a shadow stretching across something I had once taken for granted without question. At first, I dismissed it as overthinking. But slowly, the pattern revealed itself. Moments where her words didn't match her actions, where conversations bent imperceptibly toward her design, where decisions I thought were mine suddenly felt uncertain, guided by some unseen hand. It began with work. I had spent weeks planning a project presentation, meticulous and thorough. I mentioned my ideas casually over dinner, expecting her usual encouragement. Instead, she smiled sweetly, head tilted, eyes sharp behind the warmth, and said, "Are you sure that will impress anyone? Maybe you should rethink it." A passing comment to an outsider, innocent, harmless, but it landed differently in me. Just enough doubt to make me pause, question, recalibrate. Weeks of confidence wavered in a single, soft-spoken sentence. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe compromise in love meant absorbing small criticisms. But the signs multiplied. She contradicted me subtly in front of friends, reframing my suggestions as naive or outdated. She laughed in that perfect, teasing way, the one that made me doubt my own judgment while assuring me it was all just a joke. Even in private, she orchestrated tiny scenarios that left me feeling incompetent, frustrated, or off balance, always careful to leave no proof, no confrontation, just the lingering weight of uncertainty. The full betrayal revealed itself one evening by accident. I overheard her on the phone with a mutual friend, speaking in a tone I had never heard before. She laughed softly, almost triumphantly, describing how she enjoyed testing me, detailing the small nudges, the calculated comments, the subtle games that made me question myself without her ever needing to confront me. My chest tightened, the room spinning slightly as the realization hit. Everything clicked. The microaggressions, the half-jokes, the invisible manipulations, they weren't random. They were deliberate, precise, and cruelly strategic. Every compliment, every affectionate word I had trusted, had been another layer of her design, another move in a quiet, ongoing campaign to control me. A storm of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief surged inside me. How could someone I had loved so fiercely weaponize subtlety? How could the person I trusted with my entire heart turn everyday life into a battlefield of quiet psychological traps? For the first time, I saw that love alone was insufficient. Patience, intelligence, observation, and strategy were now essential for survival. And yet, amid the shock, a cold clarity emerged. If I reacted with rage, despair, or impulsive confrontation, I would only feed her power. If I misstepped, I would hand her victory on a silver platter. No, I had to match her intellect, her subtlety, her precision. I had to become the strategist, the silent force she had never anticipated. In that moment, the rules of the relationship shifted. This was no longer just love. It was a battlefield of the mind, a war fought with patience, observation, and quiet dominance. And I swore to myself then with an intensity that made my chest ache. I would not lose. Not quietly, not subtly, not ever. After I realized the depth of Laura's manipulation, I understood something vital. Impulsiveness would be my undoing. Reacting with anger, confronting her recklessly, or attempting to call out her tactics in the moment would only reinforce her control. This wasn't about revenge born of rage. It was about strategy, patience, and reclaiming the life and dignity she had slowly chipped away from me. To win, I had to think like her, anticipate her moves, and execute a plan so subtle, so precise, that she wouldn't recognize the shift until it was undeniable. The first step was observation. I began watching, listening, and cataloging everything. Her gestures, her tone, the way she timed her comments, and how she subtly recruited others into her narrative. Every laugh, every innocent question, every seemingly playful jab was a carefully aimed move in a psychological chess game I had been unwittingly playing. I kept meticulous private records. Instances where she undermined my decisions, ways she subtly manipulated our child, patterns of behavior designed to sow doubt. Each note, each memory, became a thread in a tapestry I would unravel later, with perfection, with precision. Step 2 was rebuilding myself. Laura had thrived on my hesitation, my doubts, my willingness to defer. I had to become unshakable. I started small, asserting opinions in everyday situations, making deliberate, confident choices, and strengthening my connection with our child through patience, guidance, and empathy. I focused on consistency, calm authority, and emotional resilience. Every interaction sent a silent message. I was no longer a pawn, no longer malleable, no longer someone to be tested. My presence itself became a quiet counterweight to her influence. Step 3 was influence. Instead of confronting Laura directly, I planted subtle cues to guide perception. I let her believe she still controlled the narrative, all the while shaping situations to expose her tactics naturally. With our child, I encouraged independent thinking, praised their decisions, and nurtured confidence without ever criticizing or undermining. Slowly, imperceptibly, the balance in our household began to shift. The power she thought she held through subtle manipulation was eroding beneath her feet, almost invisible, but undeniable in its impact. Step 4 was preparation for confrontation, not explosive, not humiliating, but strategic and public. I gathered evidence, examples of her manipulations, moments where she had subtly sought to control me or our child, and patterns of behavior that could no longer be denied. I didn't need to accuse. I only needed to reveal reality through actions, through presence, through the quiet demonstration of calm authority. The goal wasn't punishment, it was clarity undeniable and unassailable. Step 5 was patience. I allowed her to maintain the illusion of control, smiled at her subtle provocations, and let minor victories feed her confidence. She underestimated me, assuming that my silence meant weakness, that my composure signaled submission. But every day I strengthened my resolve, reinforced my presence, and quietly guided the dynamics in our home toward equilibrium. By the time the reveal came, her sense of dominance would crumble, not in spectacle but in undeniable truth. Finally, I envisioned execution, a carefully curated scenario where reality could no longer hide behind charm, smiles, or subtle influence. A situation where our child, our lives, and anyone observing could see the shift clearly. It wasn't about shaming her. It was about reclaiming balance, restoring safety, and demonstrating that manipulation has limits when met with strategy, patience, and unwavering focus. Late at night, as I watched our child sleep peacefully, a strange mixture of calm and anticipation settled over me. The mind games Laura had perfected over months, or perhaps years, would meet their match. The strategist she had underestimated was ready. And when that day arrived, she would realize something undeniable. The person she thought she could control had become untouchable. Quietly, calmly, and irrevocably the day I had been planning for months finally arrived. It wasn't dramatic, loud, or confrontational. It was subtle, deliberate, and psychologically unavoidable. Laura believed she still controlled the narrative. She thought her quiet manipulations over me, our child, and even our friends gave her the upper hand. She had no idea that every comment, every carefully timed smile, every whispered suggestion had been observed, cataloged, and quietly turned into a blueprint for reclaiming control. The tide had already shifted, and soon she would realize it. The setting was a small family gathering, a casual, familiar space, but public enough for the nuances of behavior to be seen and felt. I arrived calm, composed, carrying the presence I had meticulously cultivated over weeks of preparation. Laura entered moments later, radiant, confident, smiling in that practiced way she had always used to mask control and command attention. Her glance found me, quick, assessing, expecting hesitation, uncertainty, the familiar signs of submission she had grown used to seeing. But she misjudged me entirely. I began with connection, not confrontation. Every interaction with our child was deliberate. I listened intently, encouraged independent decisions, and allowed opinions to flow freely. Each moment our child chose, without seeking Laura's approval, was a silent declaration that influence could no longer be monopolized. The subtle change was immediate, though quiet. Glances exchanged, smiles given without prompting, the calm authority I projected seeping into the space. Laura noticed it instantly, the confidence radiating from me mirrored in our child, in the way the household dynamic had shifted. Anxiety flickered across her expression. She realized something she hadn't anticipated. Her control was unraveling. Next, I allowed subtle truths to emerge naturally. Conversations with friends casually referenced accomplishments, decisions I had quietly taken ownership of, and moments of consistency and stability in our household. Nothing accusatory, nothing theatrical, simply facts and observations effortlessly interwoven into dialogue. Friends noticed the shift, sensing the restored balance. Laura's smiles, once fluid and effortless, tightened. Her laughter, once an armor, now faltered in brief, telling moments. The quiet evidence of my reclaimed authority left her off balance, unable to counteract the truth without exposing herself further. She attempted to intervene, offering corrections, subtle challenges, and well-aimed microaggressions. But I remained calm, measured, and unshakable. Every attempt she made to assert dominance only underscored the reversal of control. Each interaction, each exchange, was a lesson in precision. Power was no longer hers to wield through subtle intimidation or manipulation. By the time the evening ended, the shift was unmistakable. The psychological battlefield she had carefully constructed for months was now fully illuminated, and she was losing ground with every moment. Later, in the privacy of our home, she confronted me, voice trembling with disbelief and a mixture of fear and vulnerability. You've been playing me all this time?" she asked. I met her gaze steadily, calm but resolute. "Not playing you," I said softly. "Reclaiming what was always mine. Balance, clarity, and honesty. You underestimated me, and the truth has a way of revealing itself." For the first time in months, our home felt genuinely stable. The mind games that had defined our relationship for so long had failed. The quiet dominance she relied upon had been neutralized, not with cruelty, but with patience, strategy, and unwavering presence. I had executed my plan with precision, calm, and authority that could not be denied. And in that moment, the lesson crystallized. The smartest, most enduring form of revenge isn't humiliation or spectacle. It is reclaiming balance, asserting dignity, and demonstrating, silently yet irrevocably, that a mind trained to observe, anticipate, and act strategically cannot be manipulated. The strategist she had underestimated was no longer a player. He was the master of the game. Part 6, the days after the family gathering felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Our home carried a new rhythm, quieter, lighter, as though the air itself had shifted. Laura no longer wielded her subtle influence. The micro-games that had worn me down for months had dissipated, leaving space for clarity and calm. Yet beneath that serenity, I sensed a latent unease. She had yet to fully grasp the reality I had constructed, a reality where control could no longer be hers to claim. Then came the unexpected. One evening, I returned home to find a neatly folded envelope on the kitchen counter. No markings, no flourish, only my name written in her precise, almost surgical handwriting. My pulse quickened, not in fear but in anticipation. Inside were documents, notes, and a small journal. I unfolded the first note. Laura's handwriting was impeccable, precise, yet the words revealed a vulnerability I had never glimpsed. She admitted that her manipulations, her subtle games, even her attempts to influence our child were born from fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of losing control, fear of failing as a partner and a parent. Everything had been a mechanism for survival, a way to navigate insecurities she had never learned to confront openly. Each calculated move, every gentle jab, every whispered joke was armor, forged over years of self-preservation. The journal contained revelations I hadn't expected. Accounts of therapy sessions she had kept private, reflections on childhood trauma, and confessions about the ways she had been conditioned to control her world through subtle influence. Her actions had never been cruelty for its own sake. They had been a shield. And yet, reading her words, I realized my patient, strategic approach had pierced that armor without force, without anger. The subtle battles she had orchestrated were now reflected back to her, undeniable and unflinching. Tucked at the back of the journal was a letter addressed to me. Her words struck with an intensity far beyond any victory I could have imagined. She confessed that she had never anticipated encountering someone who would respond with strategy, patience, and composure rather than anger or submission. "You didn't humiliate me," she wrote. "You made me see myself. You showed me what my fear had been masquerading as, and for the first time, I had no choice but to confront it." Her confession hit harder than any triumph. My revenge, the careful restoration of balance, the quiet reclamation of dignity, had done more than assert control. It had forced her to reflect, to acknowledge her patterns, and to face the fears she had cloaked in manipulation. The conflict had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated: a shared awareness, a confrontation with our own truths. For the first time in months, I looked at Laura and saw not a manipulator, but a human, flawed, fearful, and yet capable of growth. And for the first time, she looked at me not as an obstacle or a victim, but as someone she had underestimated, someone whose calm clarity had taught her a lesson in accountability, patience, and perspective. The twist was undeniable. My calculated strategy had not just restored balance, it had transformed the game entirely. The person I had outsmarted had been forced to see herself, and in doing so, so had I. True power, I realized, was never about domination or control. It was about clarity, presence, and the courage to act wisely amidst deception. In the end, I had executed the game with precision and foresight, but the most profound revelation was this: the mind games had ended, yet the lessons remained. The respect we gained for ourselves and each other was enduring. Revenge had become growth, deception had become insight, and the home we shared was finally defined by understanding, not control. The game was over, the victory was complete, and the peace that followed felt more powerful than any triumph I had ever imagined.